Hello, it's me, the Avatar Fanatic, and today we will be talking about the Avatar who failed. When we talk about Korra's legacy as the Avatar, we have to establish right out of the gate that calling her a failure is not about ignoring her courage, her raw strength, or the monumental fights that she won. She easily is one of the most resilient, fiercely dedicated figures to ever wear the mantle of the Avatar. And she threw herself into harm's way time and time again to protect people. But the role of the Avatar isn't just about winning individual battles. It is about maintaining cosmic balance, preserving the world's continuity, and leaving the global landscape more secure than when you found it. When you weigh her tenure on those fundamental scales, the harsh reality is that Korra's overall legacy lands in the red. This isn't an argument that she was an outright fraud or completely incompetent, but rather that her net impact on the world was ultimately a story of structural collapse and irreplaceable loss. Under her watch, the ancient line of past avatars, a 10,000-year chain of wisdom and guidance, was permanently erased. Major geopolitical capitals were shattered. Radical movements repeatedly tore through the power vacuum left in her wake. And the fundamental boundary between the human and spirit worlds was opened without a clear system to handle the fallout. Korra fought valiantly as a warrior, but as a supreme steward of global harmony, her triumphs simply could not outpace the catastrophic costs that accumulated throughout her era. To evaluate any avatar fairly, we first have to understand the job description itself. The avatar is not just a world-class athlete or an unstoppable bender meant to win tournaments. They are a cosmic institution tasked with three non-negotiable responsibilities. First and foremost is maintaining geopolitical balance. A great avatar acts as the ultimate diplomatic anchor, preventing any single nation, faction, or tyrant from overpowering the rest and throwing global politics into chaos. Their job isn't merely to react when a villain burns a city down, but to foster stability, preempt catastrophic wars, and ensure that innocent people across all four nations can live without the constant threat of total annihilation. Second is serving as the bridge between the human and the spirit worlds. The Avatar is responsible for keeping both realms in harmony, respecting the ancient boundaries, and resolving spiritual unrest before it manifests as physical destruction. They must possess the wisdom to navigate spiritual forces with care, ensuring that neither humans exploit the spirits, nor spirits terrorize humanity. Finally, a great avatar is the custodian of continuity and wisdom. Through the avatar state and their connection to the past lives, they carry thousands of years of trial, error, and guidance. A successful avatar leverages this collective experience to make informed, long-term decisions, ultimately leaving the cycle stronger and passing a more secure world and an intact spiritual legacy onto their successor. When you strip away the flashy bending and the dramatic battles, those three pillars, geopolitical stability, spiritual harmony, and preserving the generational bridge, are a standard for every avatar, and it must be measured on that sort of wavelength. Book 1 is where cracks in Korra's tenure first begin to show, laying the groundwork for a complicated legacy. On paper, her response to the equalist movement demonstrates undeniable bravery. Korra threw herself into the heart of Republic City, refusing to back down even when faced with a terrifying, unprecedented threat that directly targeted her identity as a bender. She showed the immense courage expected of an avatar, confronting Amon directly and eventually using energy bending to restore what had been taken. Yet when you look at the political maneuvering that led to the crisis, her failures became glaring. Korra completely mismanaged the social unrest brewing in Republic City. Instead of acting as an impartial mediator between the non-bending majority and the bending elite, she aligned herself with Tarlok's suppressive task force, escalating tensions and validating Amon's narrative. Her inability to understand the systemic grievances of non-benders allowed a full-scale rebellion to fester right under her nose, culminating in a near total takeover of the city and the collapse of its governing council. Most critically, Korra didn't actually defeat Amon through superior wisdom, political resolution, or strategic brilliance. Amon was ultimately undone by his own exposure as a bloodbending fraud. This was an internal betrayal that shattered his movement's credibility rather than a decisive triumph by the Avatar. While Korra survived the ordeal and restored bending to those who lost it, the cost was staggering. Republic City was left traumatized, its political infrastructure was dismantled, and Korra was forced to rely on a sudden, miraculous spiritual bailout just to recover her own powers. It showed a hero capable of surviving a crisis, but an Avatar ill-equipped to prevent one. Book 2 marks the most catastrophic chapter of Korra's tenure, revealing the devastating consequences of her political naivety and rash decision-making. Her biggest failure comes right at the start, blindly trusting her uncle Unalaq over her own father in Tenzin. Driven by frustration and ego, Korra allowed herself to be manipulated into opening the Southern Spirit portal, single-handedly setting Unalaq's dark vision into motion and unleashing Vaatu, the literal spirit of chaos and darkness, upon the world. The immediate price of this blunder was the single greatest loss in Avatar history, the permanent destruction of her connection to the past avatars. By losing Rava and allowing her to be destroyed, 10,000 years of collective wisdom, experience, and historical memory were erased in an instant. Even after Rava was reborn, the link was severed forever. Worse yet, because light and dark are bound together, Vaatu now slowly festers within Rava herself, creating an inescapable, long-term internal imbalance that no future avatar can ever truly purge. While the degradation of the Order of the White Lotus wasn't entirely Korra's fault, her inability to navigate its decaying structure left her completely vulnerable to manipulation. Her repeated bad experiences with figures like Tarlok and Unalaq set a dangerous message to the world. The existing institutions, councils, and traditional powers were hopelessly corrupt, and Korra was simply incapable of politically or rhetorically dissuading the populace of this notion. She was failing to prove that ethical, balanced leadership was still possible within these frameworks. By leaving the spirit portals permanently open without a clear system to manage the fallout, Korra did not create harmony, she created total instability. Her failure to restore faith in democratic or traditional systems inadvertently laid the groundwork for future autocratic movements. People watched corrupt councils collapse and spiritual chaos reign, gradually convincing the masses that only harsh, absolute rule could maintain order. Korra meant well, but her actions in Book 2 left the world permanently fractured, spiritually compromised, and primed for tyranny. Book 3 exposes the severe physical and political vulnerabilities of Korra's era, showing how a single strategic misstep can plunge the world into total chaos. Confronting Zahir in the Red Lotus pushed her to her absolute limits, but her handling of the crisis ultimately left her at the mercy of her enemies. When she surrounded herself to save the new Airbender, she walked directly into Zahir's trap, resulting in the mercury poisoning that nearly ended the Avatar cycle permanently. That poisoning was a catastrophic turning point. Bound, tortured, and forced into a violent avatar state against her will, Korra was left physically broken and psychologically traumatized. The severe mercury toxicity forced her into a grueling years-long road to recovery, leaving her isolated and effectively vegetated for a massive stretch of time. While her time recovering, including her eventual path towards healing, forced her through necessary personal growth. The cost to her effectiveness as the Avatar was immense. She lost her iconic drive, her fearlessness, and her explosive fighting spirit, receiving only a modest gain in actual practical wisdom in return. Her prolonged absence created a massive power vacuum across the globe, with the Earth Kingdom collapsing into anarchy after Zahir assassinated Earth Queen Hu Ting. There was no Avatar present to step in, mediate the crisis, or restore order. This multi-year period of total inaction allowed radical autocratic forces to take root and fester, directly paving the way for figures like Kuvira to seize power under the guise of restoring stability. Zahir's extremist philosophy wasn't entirely Korra's creation, and the sudden emergence of the Red Lotus was a threat largely out of her control. Yet, the outcome remained the same. Korra was completely incapacitated by mercury poisoning, unable to stop the escalating divisions in the world, and left powerless as the geopolitical landscape fractured beyond repair. Book 4 represents the final chapter of Korra's journey, showing an Avatar who finally began to mature emotionally, but still failed to act quickly or strategically enough to prevent a global disaster. Throughout her grueling recovery, Korra did cultivate genuine personal wisdom, learning empathy, understanding the pain of her enemies, and realizing that violence alone couldn't resolve deep-seated ideological conflicts. Her ability to talk down Kuvira at the very end demonstrated that she had evolved from a hot-headed bender into a mediator capable of forgiveness. However, when it came to fulfilling her core duties as a global steward, Korra's actions were once again far too little, far too late. While she was struggling to regain her footing, Kuvira's autocratic Earth Empire grew completely unabated. Korra failed to leverage key political relationships or mobilize diplomatic networks across other nations to check Kuvira's power early on. Instead of using strategic alliances with figures like King Wu, Su Beifong, or international councils to counter the military expansion, Korra remained largely on the sidelines, allowing an authoritarian regime to annex vast territories unchallenged. Worst of all, Korra completely missed the rapid, terrifying buildup of world-threatening technology happening right under her nose. The harvesting of spirit vines and the development of super weapons, most notably the spirit-powered mecha suit with the devastating cannon, transformed the regional border conflict into an apocalyptic crisis. Korra failed to secure the spirit wilds from exploitation, failed to detect the massive industrial militarization and ultimately allowed Republic City to be invaded and leveled yet again. By the time Korra stepped in, the damage was already done. While she managed to stop Kuvira from destroying what remained of the city, her passive approach allowed a rogue general to build a weapon of mass destruction, altered the world's power dynamics forever, and tear open a third spirit portal in the middle of a populated metropolis. It was a pattern that defined her entire era, gaining personal enlightenment only after the world had already suffered catastrophic, irreversible consequences. When you isolate any single chapter of Korra's story, it is easy to excuse her. You can point to her youth during the Equalist Uprising, the overwhelming cosmic weight of Unalaq's deception, or the sheer horror of Zahir's poison and say that she was simply doing the best anybody could do under those impossible circumstances. But evaluating an avatar isn't about giving partial credit for good intentions. When you zoom out and look at her entire tenure, a damning trend emerges. Korra was a perpetually reactive avatar whose chronic lack of foresight repeatedly turned minor errors into cataclysmic disasters. Her legacy isn't ruined by one singular bad choice, but by a domino effect of impulsive decisions and poor judgment. A hot-headed refusal to listen to Tenzin in Book 1 alienated non-benders and validated a terrorist movement. Her headstrong rejection of her father in Book 2 opened the spirit portals and severed past lives forever. That single spiritual opening then birthed a new wave of airbenders, which unintentionally empowered the Red Lotus, leading to her own poisoning, a 3-year power vacuum, and the eventual rise of Kuvira's fascist regime. Every major crisis Korra faced was directly fueled or exacerbated by the fallout of how she handled the crisis before. This is the butterfly effect of Korra's tenure. Small moments of hot-headedness, political ignorance, and emotional volatility didn't just stay small, they snowballed into world-altering catastrophes. She rarely managed to nip a threat in the bud or strategically prevent a crisis before it exploded. Instead, she constantly found herself fighting on the back foot, scrambling to put out raging fires that her own missteps had helped kindle. Courageous as she was in those final standoffs, an avatar who constantly has to save the world from the downstream consequences of her own oversight is by definition failing at the core mission of maintaining lasting global stability. When we look at the legacy of any avatar, the ultimate test isn't just how they live, but the state of the world that they handed off to the next generation. Aang left behind a thriving, interconnected global society that laid the foundation for Republic City. Korra, by contrast, appears to have left behind a world on the brink. Looking ahead to Avatar 7 Havens, the picture painted is, so far at least, is one of a deeply fractured post-apocalyptic landscape, a stark reality showing that regardless of her heroic intentions, catastrophic fallout occurred under her watch, and she was simply unable to resolve the far-reaching consequences of her era. While the exact historical details of what caused this collapse remain unconfirmed, the sheer fact that a global disaster unfolded after her time proves that she failed to establish a durable, lasting balance. Whether she was once again caught on the back foot, trusted the wrong political figures, or succumbed to the pressures that were mounting of an unstable world, the result remains the same. The world that she fought so hard to protect ultimately fell apart. Whatever the precise cause ends up being for the collapse of the world, the takeaway is undeniable. Korra left her successor in a world of ruin rather than one of peace. To present a truly honest assessment, we have to look directly at the strongest arguments in Korra's defense. Her defenders rightly point out that the sheer density and scale of the threats that she faced were entirely unprecedented in Avatar history. While Aang primarily dealt with one single overarching threat in Fire Lord Ozai, with secondary antagonists like Zhao, Zuko, and Azula operating under that same imperialist umbrella, Korra was bombarded by a relentless gauntlet of wildly different existential crises. From the terrifying bloodbending of Amon and Tarlok to the cosmic apocalypse of Unalaq and Vaatu, followed immediately by Zahir's radical Red Lotus and Kefira's high-tech Earth Empire, her gauntlet was relentless. That's no denying. There's a compelling case to be made that Aang himself might have folded under that specific pressure that Korra endured. Aang was captured and imprisoned multiple times throughout his journey, but he was never subjected to the horrifying level of bodily trauma Korra faced, such as being systematically poisoned with liquid mercury. Furthermore, Aang had his own catastrophic missteps that often get glossed over. He failed to keep both Tui and La safe at the Northern Water Tribe, leaving the world on the brink of total spiritual extinction until Yue made the ultimate sacrifice. He fell for Azula's trap in Ba Sing Se, leading to the temporary collapse of the Earth Kingdom, and oversaw the complete failure of the Day of the Black Sun on invasion. Trusting the wrong people and failing in strategic moments is an occupational hazard for every avatar. Yet history tends to judge Korra far more harshly than her predecessor. When we step back and look at the entire arc of her story, the verdict becomes undeniable. Avatar Korra's legacy is a story of catastrophic net failure. She was undeniably brave, fiercely loyal, and endured physical and psychological trauma that would have broken almost anybody else. Yet the core duty of the Avatar is to preserve balance and protect the world from structural ruin. Under her watch, the 10,000-year connection to the past Avatars were destroyed, major global capitals were leveled, dark spiritual forces were unleashed, and her prolonged absence allowed totalitarian regimes to rise. She was a valiant hero in individual battles, but as a supreme steward of global harmony, she left behind a world far more fractured and dangerous than the one she inherited. At the same time, it is deeply unfair how harshly fans judge Korra without acknowledging the impossible hand she was dealt. Placing the entirety of these disasters on her shoulders ignores the rampant systemic failures and widespread complacency of the adults around her. The White Lotus had degraded into an ineffective guard force that completely botched holding the Red Lotus prisoners. The corrupt, outdated political structures of the Earth Kingdom and the United Republic Council allowed massive societal rot to fester before Korra ever set foot outside her compound. Furthermore, her tutors systematically failed her, raising her to be a master of physical combat while completely neglecting to train her in diplomacy, political maneuvering, or the nuanced realities of a modernizing world. In truth, most avatars placed in Korra's specific circumstances likely would have failed too. She stepped into an unprecedented era where technology was rapidly making the avatar obsolete, ancient spiritual boundaries were dissolving, and radical ideologies were replacing traditional monarchies. Korra was forced to figure out how to be an avatar on the fly, surrounded by corrupt leaders like Tarlok and Unalaq who exploited her trust at every turn. Her legacy is profoundly tragic, not because she lacked the heart of an avatar, but because she was a flawed, underprepared hero thrust into a world already primed for collapse. She failed her ultimate mandate, but the world around her failed her first. If you guys enjoyed the video, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel to know when I upload more content, and it's been me, the Avatar Fanatic out.